Hi, I'm Mark Stoudemire, and welcome to Season 3 of Get to the Joke. I can't wait for you guys to see what I have in store for you this season. 11 new comics, 11 new stories, unbelievable amount of just advice and just vulnerability about the lives of comedians and how that translates to the jokes that you love to hear on stage. Again, all the content this season will be completely free on my YouTube channel. I just ask that you do me just one small favor. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Please rate and review me wherever you review your podcast. I truly appreciate that you guys do that for me. Again, you can also visit me at my website, markstod.com, where you can see all my upcoming show dates, along with any other content that I put out. Again, please leave a comment, like, subscribe to this channel. It means so much to me that you do that. And now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get to the joke.
A little bit about me. I was raised by a liberal mother, total hippie, and a hardcore conservative father. Yeah. The hardest part about that childhood was probably the coexist sticker on the butt of my rifle. Don't know if any of you had that.
So our guest today on Season 3 of Get to the Joke is Dan Deprecation. He's a Philadelphia comedian by way of Los Angeles who's performed in comedy in clubs, colleges, and you may have seen him at the Comedy Store in the LA Improv. He is back in Philadelphia and runs a great monthly show at the Animation Brewing Company in Coatesville. Let's welcome our guest, Mr. Dan Deprecation. Thank you, Dan, for being here today.
Thank you. And I set so many landmines for you in that introduction, and you expertly skipped over all of them. You didn't say one of the self-deprecating things that I wrote and pretend that you said it to me and be mad. No, it's like edited on the fly. Well done.
No, I appreciate it. Well, I think where I want to get started is what I thought was very interesting. Was the fact that you wanted to be a writer first. And I can see that now with your joke writing. You're a great joke writer. I mean, I think, I think the reason I'm having this conversation with you now is because you're such a great joke writer. So kind of like, can you pinpoint a time like when you decide that it was your dream or your passion to express yourself creatively at all based on the writing?
Just as a writer or
yes.
as a comic?
No, as a writer.
Okay.
So that was first.
As a writer, I always liked writing. I remember in fifth grade, I was about to graduate elementary school, and I had an assignment to do that I really didn't want to do. I knew I was getting an A for whatever writing or whatever it was, and I just wasn't going to do this thing. And my mom sat me down and was like, if you don't do this, you're grounded. And I had argued with her. I was like, I'm already getting an A. I cannot do this and still get an A. And I found out later when I graduated, had my elementary school graduation, that it's because I was in line for an award of the best writer of the school district where
wow.
Area that I went up in, and my mom knew it, but they weren't going to tell me. So in fifth grade, I won an award of the best writer of all the kids in elementary school. And that's the best award I've ever won. I still hang my hat on that. And I feel that was kind of when I started realizing oh, I can write. And I would write for fun. I was always a reader, big reader, read all the time. In fact, I had a weird thing where I fell in with the bad kids in high school, in the beginning of high school, but I would get the shit grounded out of me. My mom would ground me for a month for a minor infraction. Just can't go out, can't use you can't watch TV, you can't use the computer. Not that there was much to do on the computer in the 90s, but you can't do no AOL chat rooms, none of that shit. And so I had nothing to do but read books. So I would just read books when I was grounded, months at a time, just reading books. And I think, like, with a lot of comedy, too, I feel it's the same way. Like, it's hard to be a writer if you don't read. The best writers love reading, and they read voraciously. And believe it or not, although my comic persona is definitely a guy who has never picked up a book in his life, I actually read a lot.
Okay.
And so that kind of informed my writing. And then in college, I kind of decided I was listless. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was going to be a grown-up. So I went with, like, my greatest talent at the time was writing. So I went into, like, getting a literature major with, like, a creative writing minor. And when I was in college, I took, like, one intro to writing class, and my professor was like, you do not belong here. Like, this is for intro level, like, jocks and stuff. And so as an undergraduate, as a sophomore, I got put in the graduate, like, postgraduate writing classes. So I was in workshops with, like, adults who were, like, writing for, like, pursuing their masters. So I kind of just fell in, and I was like, and you know this too, because of, like, a lot of the people we do comedy with, I feel like when you surround yourself with really talented people, it makes you raise your game, and you can produce a higher quality art when you're around great artists. And so in these groups, I was around a lot better quality writers than I would have been following the normal undergraduate writing path. And so that helped me a lot. And they were very encouraging, and they kind of, like, really brought it out of me. Westchester University is where I went. They're, like, a big poetry school.
Okay.
And I wrote a couple of poems that won awards.
Yeah.
And they were trying to, like, get me in the program and be like, you're going to be a poet. And meanwhile, I was, like, going to punk shows and stuff. I was not interested in doing poetry, but it was, like, fun. It was, like, the first time in my life where, like, people that weren't my family, like, made me feel special. They were like, oh my God, you're so talented. Like, we want you to, like, work at this poetry conference and stuff. And I didn't end up doing it because I was a little shithead, and I was like, punk rock forever, fuck poetry. And, but it was nice to get that treatment, and that kind of encouraged me to go with what I wanted to do more, which was writing fiction and stuff. And, so yeah, I did a lot of script writing, a couple novels that I never finished. And that was kind of what got me into the art of writing.
Now, you said you wanted to write fiction. I was going to ask you, was your writing back then and in college about you and your take on things? Because your joke writing is about your story and your kind of like your stamp on a certain, you know, issue or hot topic kind of thing. Is that how you wrote?
Yeah, no, those were the comics that I liked. I mean, like, growing up, my dad got me into George Carlin very early. I liked pre-right-wing maniac Dennis Miller before he went, like, crazy. You know, like, I was always drawn, I liked all comedy, but I was always drawn to those comics that had a very strong point of view and were talking about not even, like, society, but their take on everything that they saw. And that's informed a lot of, like, modern comedy, and I think that's very prevalent now. But, you know, we're about the same age. You grew up in the 80s and the 90s. It's a lot of, like, you ever notice? It was that kind of comedy, and that wasn't really what I was into. So it was like, that kind of, like, putting your stamp on something and the way that you see things was the comedy I responded to. But the fiction, no. I was writing magical realism. I was writing fantasy-esque things. I was into, like, Neil Gaiman. For any of the listeners that like reading, he was, like, my beloved author when I was in college. I wanted to write just like him. I wanted to write things like fantasy stories, but with, like, a realistic bent to them. And that was kind of what I was pursuing in short stories and novelization and stuff. Although I would write scripts sometimes, and my scripts were always, like, hard comedies. It was very rote, boilerplate comedies that were just, like, vehicles for me to try and tell jokes. So that was probably the time I was writing. It wasn't even my take. It was just me trying to write like the comedies I was seeing that were being produced. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, no, it's funny that you say the fantasy with the realistic bent, because in an interview you stated that you want your comedy to be fun, silly, but have a point. And so that's almost fantasy with your take on something. So there is parallels between your writing and your comedy now. Like, there is a thread of similarity that goes between them.
Yeah, hey, that's actually a really good point. I wouldn't have put that together. You do your research. I like this. Yeah, I guess now that you say that, that's true. I mean, a lot of times, like, the more serious or hard the point is, and I definitely am somebody that, like, understands privilege and understands, like, the privilege that I occupy as a straight white middle class man in America. And so I know that there's certain subjects that I might want to talk about that I don't necessarily have any credibility to talk about. And a lot of the ways that I will try and address that, or my point of view on it, is through absurdity and silliness, because that's how I can reckon with a topic that's hard. It doesn't necessarily be something that involves privilege, something that's just hard to talk about. You know what I mean? Like, I've been working on some things about my father passing at the beginning of this year, and I'm approaching that through sheer absurdity, through, like, the most absurd examples that I can find in dealing with his death or his life. And the things that I'm working on for that, it's all, yeah, he died, but that is just a factual point to get me to some crazy thing I want to talk about that's stupid and silly.
Yeah.
And you've seen, like, I have a joke about arguing with internet trolls.
Yeah.
And that whole, it's like a 10-minute joke, and that whole joke is just me. I think you said something to me the last time we saw each other. You missed my set, and you were like, "I'm sure Dan was doing silly voices again." And yeah, that joke especially is like a vehicle for me to do like 4 or 5 different silly voices in one joke. Well, and really what that joke is about, me getting into fights with, like, toxic people on the internet. But I'm using, instead of that, which I think is kind of, I don't know, that doesn't interest me as much to talk about. It's much more fun to be like, what if trolls had to talk like trolls? And then I could go like, fee, fi, fo, fum. You know, that's how I want to, that's the comedy I want, is if I'm making a point, I want to completely undercut it or water it down with reminding everybody, maybe not directly, but in how I'm speaking, that I'm an idiot. Like, you can listen to what I'm saying, but, like, don't think for a second I think I have any authority to speak on the things that I'm talking about. I'm very much of the comic school of, like, I'm just a dude at a bar shooting the shit. You know what I mean? Don't take me seriously. Don't take me as an authority. And hopefully a lot of my jokes, they get to a place where that's silly enough that even if you agree with me or disagree with me, you can be like, this guy isn't really telling us how the world is. He's telling us how his demented brain sees the world.
I like that take, but I kind of want to the internet troll one, even though that wasn't the clip that you sent me. I think that almost personifies or emphasizes your earlier point with kind of that sing song. It's very you know, you rhyme and everything like that, and I think it's to your. I mean, don't quote me on this, but I think it's Gary Goldman that had like a comedy tip or something like that one time, where it's like, just like picking out the right word. Like, I think like he was talking about like name, like you don't want to choose Billy, or you want, but you know, it's like you want to also be pleasing to the audience ear. You know, like there's something with that, which I think you hit on better than other comics that try to take on the same kind of subject matter. So no, I do tip of the hat to you.
Thank you.
So you didn't start stand-up till you were 30. So between college and stand-up, were you pursuing the life of a writer?
Yeah, I was. I did the. You know, I'm very much an elder millennial, so I fell prey to a lot of the things that my generation did. I tried to play the game. I tried to do what they told me to do. Like they said, go to college, get a job, work it, you know, play the game, you know, stack up those vacation days, get the 401k. And I hated it. I hated every second of it. And when I wasn't working, I was definitely living like an extended college life. I partied through most of my 20s. You know, after college, I moved into this farmhouse. I went to Westchester University, as I said. I moved to a farmhouse outside of Westchester, Pennsylvania, with like 4 of my good friends. And we were just throwing like keggers every weekend or like smoking every day. And we definitely had this like extended college, probably until I was about 27-ish. And then in college and then post-college, I was involved with a sketch comedy group with my friends, none of whom are stand-ups, but are all very funny writers. Like we all brought our own talents to it. Like one of my best friends went to school to be a video editor. One of my other close friends went to school for directing. I've always been like the drama club ham. So like we all kind of brought our own things to it, and we made, you know, it was amateurish, and we were definitely not taking it as seriously as I think a lot of people do now, because we were right at the beginning of video on the internet as like a commodity.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It wasn't. Now, it's right. You can do it on your phone, and everyone's creating content.
It's all expected.
But this was very much like we had the conversation on that. Are we doing it for ourselves? Are we going to try to sell this? What are we doing?
Yeah.
So I always had the opinion that we were just doing it for fun. So I was just doing it for fun, and then maybe when we were like 27 or 28, it just kind of started falling apart. Personal things and everyone's life was kind of growing apart too far to do sketch comedy. And I found myself being very like depressed over it. And I had a friend from high school who moved to LA to get sober. You don't normally hear that. But he was worse than me. He was one of those bad kids that I used to get grounded hanging out with. And a few of those guys got into like hard drugs.
Oh, wow.
Like the kind you got to cook with a spoon, you know? And he hit rock bottom at some point. We had grown apart.
Yeah.
But he had hit rock bottom and moved to LA to get away from the group of guys that he had been hanging out with. And he got into stand-up comedy out there, and he would call me up. Eventually we reconnected, and he would call me up and have me pitch ideas for his jokes and like punch his jokes up for it. And every time he'd be like, you need to do stand-up comedy. You need to do stand-up comedy. I was like, I'm not really interested in that. I like watching it, but I can't imagine doing like a solo comedy pursuit. And when my sketch comedy group kind of fell apart, I felt myself really being like, I want to keep doing humor and I want to create with comedy in some way. And I was like, well, stand-up comedy is the way to do it. So I started doing it at the behest of my friend Bill, and I just fell in love with it.
Awesome. So kind of we're back even further now. So like your comedy is very, there's definitely anyone who's seen your comedy enough times or knows you like I do, definitely has a very, you even mentioned here, very liberal spin to it. When you mentioned your privilege. Even the clip you sent us, you were raised by two very polar opposite political parents or whatever.
I was.
Now they ended up getting divorced when you were 11, but can you tell me like how that was growing up? I mean, was that an issue, or was it an issue growing up with them, for 11 years or whatever?
I asked my parents at one point, I was like, this is a funny story too. I asked my mom, I was like, well, I don't remember a time when you and Dad weren't fighting. My whole memory, I'm sure when I was a young child they were getting along, but when I had my memories forming, no, they were fighting all the time. It was not a good relationship from what I saw. And I asked my mom at one point, I was like, you and Dad never seem to get along. Was I an accident, baby? And my mom, like, not even trying to be funny. She was like, no, that's the problem. We planned you. You go wonder why I'm a comic when you get offhand comments like that. My memory of my mom and dad, my childhood wasn't super happy. I'm a comedian, can you tell? And it was, but it wasn't because of me, but you're caught up in it, and I'm an empathetic person, and I think my parents were very much of like that 80s idea of like they didn't have that modern thing of like the child is a sponge absorbing everything, so they would like fight in front of me and stuff, and I don't think that they necessarily thought of it as like, oh, we're not being mean to him, like what is that doing to him to see? So that definitely was a tough as a child. And then my mom and dad split, and me and my mom were on our own for about a year and a half. Yeah. And then my mom bought a house, and to help out with that, my aunt started renting a room in the house. And my aunt is, and I have a joke about this. My mom is a super hippie liberal. My dad was like a MAGA. I mean, not at the time, but later, a MAGA conservative, and my aunt is like a butch lesbian. So I was having like this weird Dharma and Greg, but like toxic situation to being raised by two women, and that was like most of my formative years were a very manly, doodly lesbian, my Aunt Eileen, who's wonderful, and then my mom, who's like a hippie, dippy, straight woman. So it was definitely interesting.
Why did you go with your mom, not your dad, may I ask?
My dad didn't, I don't think my dad wanted me. Like my dad was a great guy, And when I was an adult, we got along really well. But he was one of those guys, I don't think he knew what to do with the child. So my mom is very nurturing and motherly and wonderful. And so I think it wasn't, I don't even know if it was like a question. My dad wanted to spend time with me, but I don't think he wanted he wanted the bulk of the custody.
Okay.
I was every other weekend kid. Even then, I remember when I was young, my dad I didn't like being over at my dad's house because he didn't really like entertain me, like put on a movie and be like, all right, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of like bored. Whereas my mom was like engaging and she was like the parent that was trying to like make me do well, things like that.
Yeah.
And then when I got older as an adult and my dad could relate to me as an adult, so around like maybe 16 or 17, that's when my dad and I's relationship got much better.
Good.
Where we started being able to relate to each other a lot more.
Okay. Now, do you think do you think that your liberal approach to life is because during your formative years, during your puberty and going to high school, you were in a very liberal environment? Do you think if you were with your dad, you've been conservative talking to you now?
Probably, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, going over to my dad's on the weekends and just like seeing how like he also was that kind of guy, like that 80s divorce where like he hated my mom and was always bad-mouthing her to me and stuff about things that I knew were like patently false. Like he would be like, oh, when you're with me, your mom's out getting drunk. And I knew that wasn't true because my mom like barely ever drank. She was, I didn't know at the time. She was a huge pothead. She hid that from me. But I was like, mom's never alcohol in the house.
Yeah.
So I could kind of see even at a young age that my dad's behavior around the divorce was pretty toxic. And my mom's wasn't. My mom, I would come back and tell my mom that he would say these things. And she'd be like, well, your father is hurt. And she'd be like very like understanding. So it was like lead by example. Like I could see the way to be by how she was.
Yeah.
And then just being mostly raised by two women and then having like and my conservative dad taught me things that my mom and my aunt probably couldn't have taught me just because of their skill sets and their point of view. But on the morality and like ideology, it was no contest just because of I got a firsthand view of how, not to denigrate anyone's viewpoint, I think that modern conservatism involves a lack of empathy. And my dad definitely had a lack of empathy.
Okay.
Well, he was a typical conservative. Like, I'm sure if I was gay, my dad would have been way cooler with gay people. He's one of those conservatives where it's like if it affected him personally, he was cool about it. But if it affected somebody else, theoretically another person, and he couldn't relate, he had no acceptance or he just didn't care, you know? So, whereas my mom is like love and light and sweetness for the world. Yeah. So I think just seeing that example is really what kind of led me to be the person that I am.
The peacemaker kind of attitude that you bring into relationships and friendships and anyone that you build an attachment to, does that go back to then your parents? Did you play the peacemaker that you can recall in those 13 years that they were together?
I definitely, so like having that like messy 80s divorce going on around me, I definitely was like the messenger where it was like, tell your mom this, tell your dad this. So I had to be this like weird child diplomat where like, my dad would say like, tell your drunk mother that when she's done being a slut, I don't know if you ever called her slut, but like he would talk about her drinking all the time when it wasn't true. And he'd be like, tell your mother if she can like clean herself up and leave the bar that you need this or that at school. Then I have to go home and be like, Dad wants me to have more notebooks at school. Like I would have to like, filter out that shit. My mom, I didn't really get that as much from her on her side, but like, I remember having to be like almost like a child diplomat with like all that stuff. And that kind of probably, informed some of my peacemaking proclivities. Yeah.
So obviously that messaging back and forth is very uncomfortable for a very small child like yourself, for 13-year-old, 14-year-old Dan Deprecation. Can you recall using humor to diffuse it? Like, hey, I have a tough message I got delivered to this one parent. I don't want to get the brunt of it because the brunt goes to the other one who's not there. Do you use humor? Does this now generate this humor now?
Totally, like a spoonful of sugar, making the message down. That was totally me. And I'm always been a person that copes with humor. So, and I think that's true for a lot of comics. Like we tend to laugh at things that would make other people cry. We laugh instead of crying a lot of times. And that was me. I definitely found that I was coping with like being funny and by laughing, making myself laugh at like absurd situations. And then it translates to, you know, when you're a kid and you're not good at sports and you don't necessarily have like a talent that's shining through. Because even like when I won an elementary school writing thing, it wasn't like people were like, wow, you're a great writer. No one cares if you're
Yeah.
good. So I didn't really have anything when I was younger that would let me stand out, but I was very funny. So that was how I kind of earned that social credit in school, by being like the class clown and making people laugh. And I'm sure I kind of learned that coping from the nasty divorce.
Yeah. Okay.
I also have an Italian, my dad's side of the family is Italian.
Okay.
I have a lot of uncles, and that's like when you grow up Italian, it's like having to constantly, family reunions are war zones. Like all my cousins are very funny people because we would just get constantly heckled. Like uncles would get together and they would just mock us, just adults mocking children, you know, and it was all love, but like, man, you have to get tough quick if you are growing up in an Italian family.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about you growing up. From what I read here and from what you've been telling me, it sounds like school wasn't the easiest thing in the world socially. You said that you would have to fight sometimes in self-defense. You were picked on a lot because of your height. And then on top of that, it seems like if you just got a little out of line, your mom sent, you know, you were being punished. You know, it seems like this is a very weird kind of childhood, because it seems like, where do you belong, you know, at school or at home, or, you know, your dad's only seeing you every other weekend. That's, you know, you're internalizing that as like, I'm just his kind of buddy or whatever at this point, or, you know. So growing up, tell me about that a little bit. Tell me about your attitude growing up.
Sure. I mean, you know, like I said, I wasn't that happy of a kid. I was funny, and outwardly people probably thought, wow, this kid's really like fun. But I wasn't. I was very sad on the inside. And I think I learned how to be happy, you know, and as an adult, I'm a pretty happy person, I think, generally. But yeah, it took me a long time to kind of get there and get right with like dealing and processing, I guess what it was that like my mom was a single mother. She was working all the time. She was working really hard. She was doing her best, but I'm an only child, so I was alone a lot. I never really learned to like how to cope with things. So I kind of had to teach myself that growing up. I don't know how much of it I actually taught.
How do you teach? Like, how does a middle school kid teach himself to cope?
I think that's one of the reasons that I got so funny, because that was one of the things that I could figure out, a tool that I already had.
Okay.
Then I got into like things like I started acting in high school. I started, you know, and being social, like making friends. I make friends very easy, but when I was younger, it was hard for me to keep social groups, because like a lot of my friends became like bad kids. What my young friends I had when I was young in elementary school, going into middle school and high school, they became like bad kids, and I kind of grew apart from them because I couldn't hang with them. Like I was drinking when I was younger, I guess, like a sophomore in high school and stuff, but I wasn't as into doing like the stuff that they were into doing, like guzzling Robitussin and shit like that. I never did that. Like I was like, I always thought that was dumb, but they would do shit like that. They would go to like parties and stuff. And like a lot of the guys whose parents were like real like laissez-faire and would let them party and stuff, those guys didn't like me. So I was, once like parties started, I kind of was on the outside of all of that. It kind of pushed me towards like the people that were in like the drama club and some of the other clubs in school that I was involved in. So I occupied this weird space where I was popular by the actual definition of the word, by like the amount of people that liked me, because I was a class clown and I would float between like social groups, but I wasn't I wasn't cool like, by any imagination. The cool kids actively wanted nothing to do with me, although a lot of my friends when I was younger became the cool kids. So I was sort of on the outside. I had like a grudging respect from some of them, but they didn't really want to associate with me. And then like a lot of the nerds would look at me as like too bad to hang out with. Like I was like trouble. Yeah. So I kind of occupied this space where like I could sit at like 5 different tables at lunch, but I didn't really have any close friends until maybe my junior year of high school, probably. So like I was well liked, but like not I didn't have a crew. I didn't have like people I could confide in. So I was very, I guess, lonely, being an only child, not having a lot of like strong friend bonds when I was younger. I was surrounded by adults. A lot of my association was with my mom and her friends, or my aunt and friends. So I was surrounded by adults. In fact, a friend of mine, Bill Dixon, he's a comic, and he has a joke that he's like, whenever you see a child and they're associating with adults in that cute way where they're like, I'll have what she's having, and they're making like a joke that's like well above their maturity level, that child is damaged. Like, if that child's making a joke like it's happy hour somewhere, it's like that child has a lot the
Okay.
And that was like the kind of kid that I was, where I was used to associating with adults because I didn't really have that many peers when I was young that were close to me. Now, funny enough, like the skills that I built up doing that, like I make friends extremely easy. I am very lucky and rich in friendship now. I have a lot of really close friends, and I have a lot of I have like a larger extended friend group and acquaintance group. So that struggle really I got what I wanted. It's like a rags to riches story, I feel like.
That's cool. That's cool to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not lost on me that you know, in the first 5 minutes you had mentioned that you didn't feel special until college, and when people would know you feel. So it's like, you know, it seems like, would this an incorrect statement? Would you say that humor were your dues in order to get into the friends that you had in high school? Without humor, they wouldn't want anything to do with you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that humor was always my in. I think the friends that I made that were my really close friends in high school, it was probably the in, but that wasn't the be all end all. Like if I stopped being fun, like when I was sad or having a tough time, they were still there for me. I wasn't like I had to be a clown for them. But certainly a lot of the social cred I got from people that would otherwise want nothing to do with me, it was because I was funny, you know, like. Yeah, because I would make everyone laugh in class. I would always have quips, and I was good at walking the line on getting into trouble. Like I would get into trouble. I learned really early that if you could make adults laugh, you would never really get into that much trouble. Right? Like if you're acting up, but the adult is actually laughing, you aren't going to get sent. You might get like sent out into the hall, but you won't get sent to the principal because the adult won't want to write you up because you've actually done something that entertained them. You know, so I kind of learned that at a young age, that as long as what you're doing is actually funny, you can be more disruptive. And so a lot of the other disruptive kids would get suspended a lot, and I never once got suspended in school, actually. So.
All right. And now, fast forward, you try your hand at stand-up comedy in Philadelphia the first time, and it's almost like a flashback to high school because the frat kids start picking on you on your first time on stage, but it wasn't for the host at the time as like a savior.
That was crazy.
Yeah. So I feel like you almost have now assumed that role. You see, like, you almost now come in. You had mentioned that you kind of like you're like the welcome committee to new comics. Like you're the welcome wagon coming in. So you almost like try to stop everything that's happened to you in your life from happening to other people around you.
That is totally true. I try to be the person, and there were people like that in Philly comedy when I started too. My first mic that you kind of touched on. It was
Alejandro.
At Urban Saloon. And the hosts were one of the hosts was a great comic, Alejandro Morales.
Yeah.
And he introduced me, and I went up with like my printed out paper of
your tweets,
one-liners that I was faking. And there were these dudes, these like frat bros from like I think Drexel, and there had been a lot of really good, talented comics that had went up before me, and they were doing that thing. We've done it too, where you start there's an audience, so you start throwing actual jokes out to them, not the raw thing you're working on. You know, I get some laughs. So they were throwing out real jokes, and it kind of made these guys like emboldened. I think they were even being crowd worked. So like these guys were feeling very bold, and I was up there reading my like shitty tweets or whatever it was. They weren't tweets at the time, but like one-liners. Getting nothing from the audience, what I deserved. And but one of the guys, he wasn't shouting it at me, but loud enough that I could hear from the stage. He kept leaning over to his friend, and every time I told a joke, he'd go, "Next." And it was like, And I got off stage, And Alejandro went up and he went, hey,
Yeah.
guys, it's really hard to do this. And that was his first time on stage, so give it up for him.
Yeah.
And that was so sweet, but it's also, to me, I'm the type of person that added to the mortification.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like you don't need the big brother anymore in your life to protect you. Yeah.
But ironically, now I try to do that because that was such a mortifying experience for me. And I was like an adult. I was in my late 20s when that happened. I wasn't a kid. So it still really sucked. And and the other thing is I was picking the wrong rooms to go. Urban Saloon was great, but there was a couple of rooms, some of them are still running, that just, and Philly has that hard-nosed mentality where it's like, you earn your dues.
Exactly.
We will be very comfortable being mean to you until you earn your dues. You're a new comic. We don't care about you. You'll be washed out in 2 more months. So why should I be nice to you? I don't like that attitude. I don't really begrudge people for having it, but I don't want to be like that. So when I see new comics who are working hard, I try to be the opposite of some of the people that I ran into when I started, and just be encouraging, because you lose nothing being nice.
Yeah.
There's no penalty to being nice, and there's nothing. The way I look at it is, some of these people that gave me a little bit of no comics were mean to me, but cold.
Yeah.
Cool. Some of these comics, they're still doing open mics, and this was 8 years ago, 9 years ago now, something like that.
Yeah.
The first couple times I did open mics. So it's like, the way I look at it, and I try to humble myself with this too, is no matter how much I might think like I have more skill than, say, like a comic that is in their first year.
Yeah.
We're at the same open mic. You know what I mean? In my mind, it's like I always remind myself, like, you ain't shit, dude. Like, maybe if you had a Netflix special and you were touring and it was like $50 a ticket, you could delude yourself into thinking you were above the level of an open micer. I am not. I'm an open micer. I might have talent. I do think I am. But hey, me and that guy that's doing their first open mic, we are in the exact same location on the exact same list. And to me, that's humbling in a good way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I can say like, you're probably one of the more beloved comics that I see, out there. I mean, to your credit, you're like a magnet. I'm very shy, standoffy kind of thing, and even I
don't think that's true. You're beloved. Everyone loves you, Mark.
But there's a gravitation towards you. I see when the kind of open mic ends, there's like the swarming of the Dan Deprecation that happens. I mean, that's how you got COVID. I don't know, but maybe if you
fucking open micers. God damn it.
Yeah. So let's start. It's interesting. You've touched on kind of how you got into comedy, and you've mentioned his name a couple of times, which is Bill Dixon. He kind of gave you kind of like the nod or whatever, the nudge. But like, I think my sister's funny, but if I told her, hey, you should go do comedy, there's no way in hell she got on stage. So there seems to be something, even though like there seems to be something in the back of your mind that's like, I've been eager to kind of try this out. I almost needed like the knighting of the Bill Dixon in order stage or whatever. So tell me where you were at kind of like with getting on stage at that point.
Yeah, first of all, let me give you a shout out. He's a great guy. He's one of my oldest friends. He's a great comic. Is so successful. He's actually the producer of a very successful show called Fuckboy Island. I just like saying the title. Yeah. He's like, I think he might be the showrunner at this point, but he's like a very extremely successful producer. He worked on The Bachelor. He's done a lot of stuff, and I think he hasn't been doing as much comedy now because he's so busy with his intensely successful career. But he's one of the funniest comics. If anyone listening, or look him up, I don't know if he has any clips up anymore, but he is one of the best. I'm talking about a writer that's married like performance to writing and just like a keen like eye and the way to criticize society and stuff. He's incredible. And I like him as a fan and a friend. But he pushed me hard. And we're talking, he probably called me once a week for a year and a half, and we would talk comedy or we talk like whatever. He had me write. He would try to run a blog for a little while. He had me write for his blog, and he would just constantly be like, so have you gone up to a mic? Have you done a mic? And I'd be like, no, man, or like when that thing happened, I was like, I don't know. I think that first time I went, I didn't go back up at a mic for like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
And now he was like leaning on me. He's like, no, you have to keep going. And giving me great advice. Bill was like, come out to LA, come visit me. You got time. You know, you can stay at my place. I'll show you around. And I went out and he said, hey, at the end of this week, if I got you a job interview, would you take it? But if you get the job, you have to promise me you will come out and work the job. You won't accept the job or take the interview if you think you're going to go back home and work at another tech company. And I was like, sure. So I interviewed at this studio called Mission Control that does like a lot of reality television. And I got the job. So I went to visit LA. I think I was probably 29 at the time ish. Maybe I think I just turned 30. And I went out to visit and flew back and had to tell my family and friends, like, hey, so in 2 weeks I start a new job, so I'm packing everything up and moving to LA. And it was like a huge leap, best decision I ever made. And once I was out there, Bill had his hooks in me, and he was like, now we're doing it, baby, we're grinding. And so I really started hitting like multiple mics a night and being bad, you know, and figuring it out. But once I had somebody in my corner who was encouraging me, it made all the difference in the world. And I think that's kind of why with like these younger comics that I see out at the mics and stuff, like I try to be kind of like that to them, where it's like if I see something in them and I think that they're doing a good job with a joke or with like what they're developing, I try to encourage them because I know the value of having someone, I hope they see me as like a good comic, but someone that you look up to the way that they do the art and have them go, I see it in you too. That was so valuable for me. I wouldn't be a comic if it weren't for Bill's, not just his like practical help, but just his belief that I could do it.
Oh, cool.
So I try to give that back. You know, you try to want to you will try to want to change the things you didn't like, and also give back the things that helped you. That's kind of what I'm doing. So yeah, he's a huge influence. Probably the reason I'm a comic now.
Well, thank you, Bill, because you're a great comic. So. Appreciate that he got you into it. Now we talk about belief or whatever. It's kind of eye-opening to me now that we've been talking about your parents or whatever, that the woman who raised you and kind of gave you your kind of guidance in life didn't really support the whole comedy thing, and the guy who was kind of part-time dadding on you was real supportive. So it kind of flipped the script on you. So what was that like when you're? And I know your mom is like my mom. Like they're not actively like telling you to stop or whatever like that, but at the same time they're not going out of their way to see how comedy's going or whatever. You know, it's the it kind of thing. So our moms seem very similar on that page. So I think I kind of an insight into how that world's like. Was it devastating when your mom was kind of like shrugged her shoulders at you, you know, for the whole thing, and then your dad was like, "Let's do this. I love where this is going," especially because he wasn't a big fan of the whole being a poet kind of deal.
Yeah, he definitely didn't like that. No, I think that was one of the benefits of starting at 30 is that I was pretty well into who I was. The approval and encouragement of my parents at that point, while it would have been nice,
who were
not
you?
Necessary. And my mom loves me. My mom is the type of person that's like, I wish you would do something more stable, but I support you. And I have the benefit now of having done enough that has been close enough to success that my mom recognizes at the very least that like other people have responded to me positively. You know, I nothing went, but like I shot a couple of things for television and stuff like that. And you have those modicum of success that I've crossed that with her, where I'm sure she still wishes I was doing something that had stability and a healthcare plan and things like that. But she now knows that this is like what I love to do and that like I have to do it. And so she kind of supports me on that level. Whereas, earlier she was very much like, why are you doing this? Why would you do this thing that doesn't pay money? And then like at some point in LA, like I was close to being homeless and stuff like that. That's what she didn't like. She was not into me pursuing something where I was sleeping on a couch in my friend's garage so I could keep doing open mics while working in like a kitchen to pay my bills. And she was like, you know, she believed in me more than that, I guess it would be her argument, is that you were so smart in college. You have so much skill. Why are you a line cook in North Hollywood and living in like Long Beach in a garage and driving an hour in LA to do open mics? But it was just because, you know, I loved it. And my dad was the opposite. When I wanted to be a writer, my dad was actively like, why are you doing that? What do you think you're going to do with that? Why are you getting a literature degree? Why do you want to be a writer? Do you know what writers make? Nothing. And never supported me on that. And then I started doing comedy. Way worse of a job than writing. There are way more opportunities as a writer than you do as a comic. And yet, because my dad was the one who kind of turned me on to comedy, and I think secretly somewhere deep down in his heart, he always wondered maybe I could have done this.
Yeah.
And I was out there chasing my dream, and I realized like, oh, this was one of your dreams. And so talking about like conservatives being the kind of person that can't really empathize with you unless you're something that they connect with. So it was so funny because I was like, yeah, my dad's really going to hate that I'm pursuing stand-up comedy. And it was the fucking opposite.
I like to break down your jokes. I like to see it from like what is a very baby seed to where we see it when you do a clip. So I noticed with your the first question the first theme is like, how do you even find your material? Where are you going to find it? If someone had asked me describe Dan's jokes, I would say, well, I could probably factor them either they're self-deprecating or he's making a point based off some like an issue, like he's making something funny. The self-deprecation thing is a little interesting because when other comics have self-deprecation, I can kind of see it. Yours, I would say, and don't take this the wrong way, but it's like manufacture self-deprecation because you're not a bad-looking guy. When you go on stage, you put on your flannel shirt and your trucker hat and you grow your beard out, you can easily get rid of that and be a good-looking guy behind all that. But then you make fun of that or whatever. So I want to ask, like, how and you mentioned, I was getting at when you said about your parents, and I said, like, was it kind of upsetting when your mom didn't support you? And you said, oh no, because I knew who I was then. So kind of tell me, who are you, Dan? Who do you think you are?
Man, you tell me I'm good looking and you're asking me these questions. I feel like I'm on a date. This is okay. Okay, so I'll start on the self-deprecation, and then I'll move to the larger question.
Okay.
With self-deprecation, the way I look at it from a very technical, like nuts and bolts joke writing perspective is that your chief goal when you're starting a set, and especially when you're doing, now you and me are now in a position in our careers where we do a little bit of longer sets, but we're still doing sometimes shows where we only have 5 minutes, 10 minutes. In that short amount of time, one of your chief goals is to build rapport. And you want the audience to like you, and you need them to like you as fast as possible if you want to engage in headier jokes or riskier jokes or jokes where you're going to want them on your side. And I could shave and probably look a little less like this, but I have a face that is not exactly in vogue with most entertainment consumers right now. And I get why. This has been the face of comedy for a very long time. People want different voices. People make a lot of assumptions about everyone when they get on stage. I'm very much not how I look. Like, my ideology and my persona and stuff is not what you would expect if you saw me on my mugshot or something like that.
Yeah.
So I have to get up there and build rapport very quickly and show you that a lot of my comedy, I think, is married to this too, is like the idea of like inverting expectations and being things. A lot of my comedy is like what I'm experiencing, the dichotomy of like how I look and how I am, or how I live and how I want to live, and things like that. So I try to use self-deprecation as a very quick way to build rapport, because it's kind of like calling the secret of the room, but you're always going to have that secret because it's always going to be you in the room. So it's nice if you're in a room where something weird's going on and you can point it out and the audience can be like, oh my God, yeah, I did see that weird sign out front, or I did see that creepy car parked out front, or whatever. Someone's strange laugh in the audience or something like that. But if you don't have that, you're always going to have what you look like. And so if you can, or what you sound like, or how you are. So if you can get really good jokes, or a series of jokes, or bag of jokes, I guess, that you can pull from that are self-deprecating, you can earn rapport very quickly, and you can earn the ability to talk about things where if you go up and you just say, oh, like, I don't really do any overtly political jokes, but if you were to get up and be like, politics is weird, huh? A guy that looks like me, people just don't, I'll turn on CNN and see somebody that wrote a book talking about it. I don't need your So you have to kind of be like, look, again, kind of like what I said earlier, is like, remind the audience, like, hey, first and foremost, I ain't shit, and I know I ain't shit. But will you listen to this thing I have to say? And then generally audiences will be more accommodating to whatever you want to say after that. And I also like a good I look like joke isn't always like I look like this celebrity, fuck this celebrity. I think every good like self-deprecating joke in that regard puts a thought in people's heads.
Yeah.
So I have a joke, a quick one. It's like I look like the member of the militia who's in charge of bringing the snacks.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that people think of that when they look at me, but I like to think that I can implant that thought in people's heads, and then they go, "I see it," you know. So it's self-deprecation in that way is a tool, and it's a tool that I'm very good at using, probably due to coping with being like an awkward kid. Learning to self-deprecate is an easy way to get people on your side, and I try not to do it. It's a pitfall. You can have people, you can't do too much of it. Because if you do a lot of self-deprecation, you start getting, and you don't want that in comedy, you know? And so it's definitely like a line that I try to walk. But I like self-deprecation. Like, if you are good at this too, like you can make fun of me in ways that truly make me laugh. Like when you make fun of me, and it's all love, you're always just poking fun, but you do it in a way, I only ever get mad or annoyed when it's a lazy observation. Like the better the burn, the more I'm going to fucking love it, you know? And so I like that stuff, and I like burning myself, and then it lets me burn other people. Like I can call out a member of the audience that's funny or whatever, like doing something stupid, if I've shown the audience that I think that I am the shittiest one in the room, you know. So that's the tool of self-deprecation. Who am I?
Well, before we go to who am you, did you use self-deprecation, going back to, like you said, how you made friends in school was with your humor kind of thing? What do you remember that humor being at your expense?
Yeah, so it's a classic try and make fun of me. You can't. I will make fun of myself. I will jujitsu your joke into a better joke about me in a way that shows you and anyone else that's listening you have no power over me. Like you can try. It's like trying to hit Superman with like your fist. Why would you even try? You've already seen a bullet bounce off. So it would be like, hit me with your fist. I'm going to shoot myself with a gun. Everyone's going to watch the bullet bounce off me. And then you're going to look like the fool for even trying to hit me. You know, and then you could turn it around and, you know, flip it on them and be mean to them. I had that when I was a kid. A lot of times people would be mean to me and I would be mean back. And then people would be like, Dan, why are you being such an asshole? Are you kidding me? Did you not observe everything that happened before that? So I found that being self-deprecating was a good way. And this kind of works in comedy, too. You shouldn't want to be mean to people. But, like, you can make fun of other people if you've made fun of yourself first. And so I felt like that was always, when growing up, definitely a survival technique.
So this prior survival technique where you know, in the middle school lunchroom where you were able to gain likes and friendships from people at your expense, and you had to maybe grit your teeth and bite your lip in doing so. Now that has become the fodder and your base now. It's like, hey, it's no longer survival mode. I'm now in the empowerment mode where I can now control it, kind of thing. You said there's nothing that the audience can do there's no joke they're gonna come up with, you know, that's gonna be smarter or better than what you're constantly saying.
Right. Man, if you can tell a joke that makes people die laughing, it's probably such a good burn that I'm laughing just as hard. Please get me with both barrels. So that's, I think, comes with knowing yourself, where it's like I know my strengths, and I know that I am a good person. Like I am pretty self-assured in that way. I still have like a lot of like, what am I doing questions, but who I am, I know very well. So you can make fun of me. They make fun of me for being bald, make fun of me for being short or fat. It does not bother me. Make fun of it. Just that truly, it isn't even like, oh, it bothers me on the inside and I'm laughing. No, I like laughing at myself. It's because usually in comedy too, people that are going to make fun of you are only doing it because they like you. So most of the time, the people that make fun of you are your friends, or they're good-natured people, even if it's something you might not know that well. So it's never. I had to deal with a lot of like barbs and hard words growing up, so I know the difference between a joke or even an attempt at a joke versus somebody trying to hurt my feelings.
Yeah. So it's like you never took a comedy class, but like middle school, high school was like your basic training, and now being a comedian now is like, okay, this is boots on the ground. Now I can use these tools. Now, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm like the guy in Saving Private Ryan, like smoking the cigar and walking while like the bullets are flying by. Like, you should be ducking, and it's like, fuck a short dick joke. Fuck it, all right, give it to him. You know, like doesn't bother me at all. You know.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on to who the Dan DePreel's joke till later. I am. I think we'll probably mine something else more out of that. But I want to. So now, kind of going. How do you gather material? Because you do have very topical or what was topical at a moment material. Do you pull your material from current events, like when we pulled out of Afghanistan? Were you thinking about trying to write a joke around that, or kind of where do you gather material? Like where's your wells that you go to get water from?
I every once in a while I'll tap into like what's happening now, the things in the news. Like, for instance, that member of the militia who's in charge of bringing the snacks joke. Yeah. That was actually a news story.
But I get it. It's tough dating when you look like this. I look kind of like the member of the militia who's in charge of bringing the snacks. You see it? Billy, this week you're bringing the guns. Jimmy, this week you're bringing the ammunition. And Danny, you're bringing the bugles and the Little Debbie snack cakes.
There was like a militia that took over. This was like
some capital. Yeah.
They took over that bird sanctuary. Yeah. And they didn't bring enough food. Yeah. So like their first letter to the world was, "We need snacks." And and like I thought it was so fucking funny that it's like, y'all are supposed to be like the hard dudes that are going to survive when the apocalypse collapses. You've been there for 3 days and you want Pringles? Like, how are you militia members? And like, then I started realizing like, you know, oh, okay, that's hilarious. That's like a fun inversion of like what should be a scary thing is like, oh, you're just bringing the snacks to the party. So like I managed to turn that into a I look like joke, but that was a very much like something that was in the news. I try to make things... The jokes that I tend to try to write that are from the news, I try to write because they're evergreen. I did a lot of like topical humor when I was a younger comic, and I hate spending a lot of time on a joke that won't exist in a couple of months. I'll riff from the stage and try to make something up in the moment if something's going on, but I don't really put a lot of writing effort into news stories unless I think I can turn it into something that has staying power. Okay. So I try to be more... if I'm doing something topical, it's more like cultural things where there'll be like more of a lasting power in what I'm saying. What do? I write. I mean, I live it. I write it. I like to set aside. I try to set aside 5 hours a week. A lot of times I'm over that. Sometimes I'm under that just to write. I'll carve out the time. I'll go to like a coffee shop or something, or I'll sit at my kitchen table and I will just force myself to kind of write about stuff. It's varying success, but as long as I'm doing that, generally I'll generate something that something that's good. And you see me, I'm like one of those comics. I always have a notebook with me all the time. I bring it to the mic. I don't even really use it when I'm on stage, but I always have it.
Like Liza's blanket.
Yeah, exactly. And so I have it, and I'll be able to. I mean, I have it with me right now, and it's like just in case something happens, I can write it down because I also have massive ADHD, so and I not so much anymore, but I used to be a huge pothead, so that I had a lot of thoughts that would just escape my mind and never come back. So I like having that safety blanket, like you said there, to know if I have a fun thought or a fun experience, I can write that down immediately. Yeah. So these notebooks you keep are like these Marvel color college rolled notebooks. You take that everywhere with you in case you capture an idea, or is it on your phone, or do you have like pocket field notes, or what are you capturing your material in? Or if I'm going somewhere where I think I'll have a chance to write, I'll bring it physically with me. Like a mic where I'll, you have a lot of downtime in a mic while you're waiting to go up. If I'm at a cafe by myself, or sometimes, you get dinner by yourself. If I'm getting dinner by myself, I usually bring it. If I'm out in the world, I'll have the book in my car. And if I need to get something down, I'll put it in my notes app. But then I'll transfer it from my notes app to a notebook because I'm not, something about the phone, I just can't keep things that I write on my phone in my head. So if I like a note in my phone, it's probably because I'm like guerrilla typing it with my thumb as I'm doing something. And then I go and I put it in the book. And that's almost like the rough draft of the first edit, because then I try to write it in a more written perspective. And when I start jokes, that's totally how I start. It starts written, like highly written. And then I kind of make it more dialogue and colloquial as I perform it, you know.
Yeah. Now, I mean, with the militia joke, you know, that's you're making fun of your appearance and you're pulling into that. So the joke is funny throughout. When you tell the joke about your parents being on opposite sides of the political aisle, and you say about which is, I love the punchline about the rifle with the coexist sticker. I'm assuming tell me the genesis of that joke. What was the first thing? Was like, what popped out to you with like, this is funny? Because there was build up and then punchline. It wasn't like the Bigfoot militia thing where there was just self-deprecation. People were laughing right off the bat. So I want to get like a longer setup than punchline kind of joke. Do you remember how that started?
Yeah, I had been the coexist rifle. That is a pretty quick joke, but it's the beginning of a longer chunk. So what am I doing that? Who am I uniquely? Like, what am I doing that as a human being that sets me apart from your average person? And everyone has unique things in their life that they can talk about that separate them. And I think when you're a young comic, you don't focus on that as much, at least not if you're like a cis white middle-class man. I don't really have much from the identity bag to reach in. That's first look or first level. But then I started realizing, like, as I was thinking, like, no, I actually have a very unique upbringing and a very unique, weird life and a lot to draw from. And so that was the first joke that I did entering that phase in my sort of like conception of my act and things like that, where I would so I had this thing. I was like, okay, I was raised by like a super conservative dad and a super hippie liberal mother. Where's the push and pull? You talk about like the dichotomy, the pairing of like one thing that doesn't belong with another thing, like a man out of place or a man out of time or something like that. And I think with that, it was just very easy. That joke, that was one of those jokes that came in like almost divinely inspired. Didn't take me a lot of writing. I just was like, didn't really happen. My dad has a lot of guns. He taught me how to shoot, but I could never keep a gun at my mom's house. She wouldn't ever allow that. My mom hated it. That was like the one thing that she truly opposed me doing with my dad, because she is like total peacenik. She did not want me near a gun at all. And but, you know, I enjoyed that. And that was one of the first times with my dad that, like, I bonded with him and we were doing something that was fun for both of us and I felt close to him. So I was thinking about that a lot when I was writing it. And I thought, like, what would make a gun palatable to my mom? And the clever turn was, you slap a coexist sticker on it. And then I started laughing because just the sheer absurdity a weapon of a tool of war, a tool of harm, to have the most, and the coexist sticker is the most like Diet Coke of like bumper stickers. It's like, congratulations, it's like the suburban mom. Like, I just wish we'd all get along. So it's just super. I just loved the image, and that joke came very easily and very quickly. Like, you know, it's interesting. I'm sure you've had these too, where you feel just like blessed with like, thank you, because like the first time I told that, I got a huge laugh. It's never not. And so it's that, even when the rest of the joke about my family doesn't work, that always works. And it didn't have to struggle with that one. It came pretty quick. And then as it happens, it's like the perfect intro to a lot of my family stuff. It says a lot about me, and it's funny, and it gives people this fun image. It truly is one of my favorite jokes. I mean, I might have an hour at this point, and that's probably one of my favorite jokes.
That's awesome.
Wrote it in an afternoon.
So it's interesting that it wasn't that the coexist the sticker on the gun that came into your mind first. It's like, I want to talk about my growing up situation because it was unique. You know, you were raised by your mom and your aunt, because your parents were split, and your dad's conservative and your mom's liberal, and you. It's like, so I want to write about it. So you had no joke. You just had something you wanted to talk about. Is that how you always approach your jokes?
No, sometimes it starts with the joke. I don't necessarily have a formula to my writing in that way. A lot of times it'll be a topic that I want to talk about, and a lot of times it'll be just a funny idea or a funny thing that I wanted to talk about. I have a joke that follows in that where I talk about being raised by my lesbian aunt.
Yeah.
And I say, my childhood was probably a lot like yours. There were highs, there were lows. My aunt would get high and take me to Lowe's.
Yeah.
That was literally just me being high and being in Lowe's one day. I had to go get some. My aunt never got. Well, I have gotten high with her as an adult. When I was a kid, my mom and my aunt hid their smoking from me, and I hid my smoking from them. So a lot of times we were hanging out high and not admitting to each other that we admit it. And my aunt was not a handy lesbian. She wasn't building things. She played softball, but she wasn't like building things. So that never actually happened. But I was high one day in Lowe's, and I was giggling at the idea, like, oh, I'm high in Lowe's. And like that is what I was like, oh shit, like perfect. I could do that joke. And then very quickly I was like, oh, right. It's a very easy lesbian joke that is fun and cute. And then it helps explain quickly. I have longer versions of like those family jokes and like the conservative dad, hippie mom, and lesbian aunt jokes. But those are the quick ones where if I have to really quickly explain a lot about where I'm coming from, those are the easy ones. And yeah, that one literally just, I like happen to be high and low. So I wasn't looking for anything when I found that one. But yeah, a lot of times it's one of the two. It's either a funny idea that I've had that I then find a way to build into my act, or it's me trying to tackle something that I want to talk about, and then I figure out how to do that through a joke.
Do you still, I mean, just going back to like, your tools, a notebook's a tool. Is weed a tool? Do you still use weed as a tool to find funny?
No, weed is probably, maybe when I was younger, it probably helped rewire my brain in certain ways, but no, it's actually probably a hindrance at this point. In fact, a lot of comics like to get high at open mics. I don't. I'm never, ever high on stage. The most I maybe have drank a beer or two before I go on stage. I'm very against being up on stage high. I think or especially high, but fucked up in any way. I think I don't care that people do it, but in my mind, if I do it, it's disrespectful to the audience. They, especially if they've paid, they are here to see a show, and I have to give them a show. It's my responsibility, and I'm not. It's like you talk about like driving the bus. I'm certainly not going to be able to drive the bus if I'm fucked up. I want to get them to where they want to go. Take them there. I am not going to be able to do it drunk or high.
It's very admirable that you're able to say, I want to talk about X, and then be able to just manufacture a brilliant punchline out of it. I know you said that's not every single one you're doing.
They're not always brilliant.
No, I don't know. I mean, I certainly think they are, if that means anything. But so when a joke, like, you said that the coexist rifle joke came fairly quickly, but when you approach a joke, and it can be that one, or it can be one that you just want to, like, I want to talk about this topic, and there's no punchline. What do you do as far as writing to find the funny? Do you free write, or do you do anything? What's your initial process when you just sit down at a blank sheet of paper?
Yeah, I'll do a lot of free writing. I have like games that I can play with myself as writing games.
Tell me about those games.
So one of the tactics, I haven't used it in a while actually, but when I really want to work on something and I really want to try to get it done, I'll bubble. So like bubbling is like basically just on the paper, writing your premise or your topic, circling a bubble around it, drawing a line to another bubble, and in that bubble there's some offshoot of what you're talking about.
Okay.
So say the center bubble to go over his family. Then I would have a bubble conservative dad, another bubble hippie mother, another bubble lesbian aunt. And then if I could connect hippie mother and conservative father, there'll be another bubble in between them, which would be like coexist rifle. You know what I mean? If I had to get there. And so like you try to write that out in a visual aid to kind of make a web or like a network of ideas. And then when you can kind of take that bird's eye view on a bunch of topics, premises, or funny things that you want to write about a subject, then it to me, and just the way that my mind works at this point, it's almost like that scene in The Hangover where Zach Galifianakis is counting cards and there's all those numbers floating around his head. That when I can take a bird's eye view on a bunch of topics, my brain starts working like that. And yeah, so I'll do that if I'm stuck on things. And then there are games that you can play with the audience. You can build towards games to play. Like, for instance, we talk about the troll joke. I set that game up pretty explicitly. I say, I have maybe 5 minutes prior about things that internet trolls call me, like the names that they call you, like social justice warrior, and I talk about that. And then I talk about calling me a white knight, and then I have one about calling people a cuck. And then at the end of that, I say, but there's actually a name for those people. They're called internet trolls, the people that try to get you upset online. And when I was a kid, I read a lot of fantasy novels. And one of the cool facts about trolls is that they're forced to speak in riddles and rhymes. Then I stop and I go, and wouldn't it be fun if internet trolls were being forced to spread their stupid bullshit in rhymes and riddles? And at that point, it's just explicit for the audience what I'm about to do. And then when I go, fee, fi, fo, fum, the election was won by Donald Trump. Like, I've already set the table for them. We're about to play a game. We're going to be doing fucked up internet troll nursery rhymes. So once you can set the table on a game, if you do it well, the audience will want to play that game with you. And then you have real carte blanche to just let people into your mind and be crazy and do the things. Or in the social justice warrior joke, I go, I never heard that before, but the warrior I remember is the Ultimate Warrior from wrestling. And then I go, I wish they would bring him back. They could bring him back as the Ultimate Social Justice Warrior. And then I get to do this crazy coked up wrestler that's yelling about woke topics, like, ageism is discrimination, and it's like, that to me is like, I've already set the table. The audience knows exactly what I'm going to do. And at that point, hopefully, if the joke works, they're going to want to ride with me on that thing. So a lot of, if I'm on a topic that I want to talk about and I don't know how to get there, I try to figure out, how can I play a game with the audience? How can I bring them in and play with me on some sort of rhetorical game in a way that will make them want to ride along with this crazy thing that I want to talk about. Okay. So that's a kind of trick that I use a lot of times when I'm approaching it from, I have a topic I want to discuss. How am I going to make this fun?
That's awesome. So this writing, you touched on something I was going to bring up later during when we talk about delivering a joke, but now I'm going to put it into the initial start of the joke, which is, you mentioned in an interview that you said that you do voices because it punctuates a punchline. So when you are writing, before that joke hits the stage, are you making sure if the joke, are you looking to see, like, can I, not that every joke has it, but like, do you at least give it, like, does it at least pass the voice test? Like, do you try to see, can I put a voice in here before I bring it on stage? Does that make it into the initial round, or do you feel it out once on stage to see if it warrants the voice?
If I can think of a way to work in a voice that I can do, I will definitely do it. At one point, in one notebook, I have a list, it's like a page maybe, of like every distinct voice that I can do, good or passable, that I could use in a joke. Yeah, there's a lot of times where if I see the opportunity to do a silly voice, I will usually do it. I think you've seen me do my I have a couple of jokes where I speak in a German accent, or several different German accents. Yes. And that joke specifically was a joke that I wrote as just a vehicle to do the voice. Is like, I can scream like an angry Nazi. That's great. Or I have the other joke where I say that Americans can only do 2 German accents, angry Nazi and gay German party boy.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And then I just go, our nations will not be controlled by the borders. And then I go, this party will not be contained by this club. And that's literally just me wanting to do my stupid voices.
Yeah. So the voice can become a punchline then. So the voice can now become a punchline. So you have jokes about your appearance, and you have jokes about, issues that could be divisive, but then you can also make a voice the punchline. There's not too many comics that can do that. Jim Gaffigan is one that
I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm an impressionist or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do have a range with my voice, and you talk about tools. If you have a tool in your toolbox and you're a comic, you should figure out a way to use it. And it's just, this game is hard enough. You shouldn't fight with a hand tied behind your back. If you can do a funny voice, it can work. And, you go back to like poetry taught me a lot about form and the form of things. Comedy doesn't have to have a form. That's a beautiful thing about comedy. Neither does poetry. But one of the beautiful things about comedy is you can do it. If you can make people laugh, you can literally do whatever you want. And I, though, tend to like the form of comedy, which is like premise, setup, punchline, act out. And I think a lot of times jokes stop before the act out. And sometimes I think an act out, even if you're not doing a voice, the act out can really punctuate a punchline in a way that's really rich. And so if you can do a voice on top of that, it earns the act out a lot of times for people and adds like another richer layer, almost like a second joke while you're making your point. So yeah, I think if you can do voices and you're a stand-up comic, you should try to write a joke where you're doing at least one of them. See how it feels. It's nerve-wracking. That was one of the hardest things for me to do as a comic, was to get to a place where I was comfortable just doing crazy voices. But yeah, and you've seen that long form, like the troll bit where it's like I've got like 4 of them in one joke. Yeah. And I like that for that reason. I've been telling it now for a while, but when I started telling it, there were stakes there because I was getting outside of my comfort zone. Okay. I wasn't just relying on my writing and my like wit. I was relying on like pure performance. And I came, as you said, from a writing perspective. So to be a pure performance comic in those moments, that was really scary for me when I started doing it. Okay. So it was fun to overcome that and kind of add that to my repertoire.
Well, I'd like to touch on something you said and bring it back to an episode from my past season with Pedro Gonzalez, where he talks about he watched an interview with Drew Carey and says Drew Carey does the same thing. He tells his joke and then he'll do an act out, and therefore he tells the same joke twice, but he extends the length of the joke, and that adds value to it. Yeah. You're pretty much doing the same thing. I don't think you do so much the act out part, but you bring the voice, you bring a character into it, so now it gives a little bit of variation to the joke. People are like, okay, let's see where this goes now. He's bringing, a voice in, so it's very clever and very, very, very talented maneuver.
And a lot of times it'll allow you to say something that might not make it all the way to a joke on its own. You make a good point that might get people going, oh, that's true, or oh, that's funny. But having a voice to back it up in an act out will allow you to deliver that relatively mediocre punchline because there's a payoff waiting. Like, understand at this punchline, all I'm trying to do is get you on board with a concept that might be hard to understand. Yeah. So I say directly, and Drew Carey's great at this. Like, say it directly and then move on to the act out, and then that's where we're playing. Yeah. And that's when the big rich laughter is, because now you understand. If I just moved into an act out, there might be audience members going, wait, I don't get it, or I don't 100% where he's going in there. But if you can say your point directly, you buy yourself that ability by having a fun voice in your back pocket to pull.
Yeah. I like hearing that. Now, also someone asked about your writing is, you mentioned in a past interview that you're extremely political, but you don't want to come off extremely political in your joke writing. But having heard your jokes, I can tell you, like, hey, there's definitely a liberal slant to them. but there's a mastery to it. And what I mean by that is, I want to ask you is, when you approach a joke, do you write from different perspectives? And I'm thinking that you may, because you talk about when you wrote the Jack the Ripper poem, you wrote from his perspective versus the other perspective, which is unique. When you approach a joke like that, do you take, hey, this is the Dan Depreal view, and then here's Mr. Depreal the father view, and then that's how you can kind of craft the joke? Are you doing something like that?
Yeah, because again, at the end of the day, to me, comedy, I don't look at it like a sermon. Some comics, I think, can do it that way. Me, I'm the guy at the end of the bar that's had too much to drink and is talking too loud. And if you laugh, that's great, but I can't, my persona cannot be the guy who's telling you what it is or how it should be. I'm just the guy going, hey, I don't fucking know shit, but here it is, and that's the only way I'm ever going to be able to get, in my opinion, something about politics or culture out in a way that's palatable.
Okay. Now, did this come from your dad? Like, do you try to channel your dad's voice in this? Because it seems like when you got older and he was a fan of comedy, you guys would then have more adult conversations, like you said, and maybe, maybe skew towards politics. Like, do you guys talk, like, did he provide you fodder for your jokes, like, unknowingly, and then you were able to, like, when you want to take, like, an anti-leftist side, you kind of channel, like, what would your dad say? Well, if your dad was going to make this funny, what would he say?
Yes. Yeah. I definitely, my dad helped me get that added perspective. So my dad was a super smart guy. My dad was a lawyer.
Yes.
He very educated guy. He definitely helped me see that, because he would try to logic his way into his positions too. And even though I wouldn't agree, sometimes, that I think is good comedy too. But like Bill Burr does this a lot, where it's like, I might not agree with what you're saying, but your logic is impeccable. Like, I totally see why you're saying it, given how you justified it, even though with Burr does this, like, even though what you said was probably reprehensible, you've managed to build a joke logic so sound that I have to agree with it, even though I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
And so I think my dad would do that a lot with conservative ideology, would try to argue with me. And at the end of the day, it would be like, well, I care about people, so I can't agree with that. But I would see where he would come. And I think building that logic helps me build logic when I'm doing a joke that either is something I believe that I have to justify very well, or if I'm telling a joke that I don't necessarily believe, like in the like I said, the Bill Burr way, where it's like he doesn't really believe half the shit he says, and that's obvious. Yeah. But he builds that Swiss watch of a joke that you can't argue with. Yeah. So I try to do that too. I don't necessarily. I'm not nearly as good as Bill Burr, but I'm not good at that. As good as I want to be at that, but I try to do that.
Okay. Now, when you take a joke to the stage for the first time to try it out, do you have it written out, like, as a joke, or is it just, like, what they would call, like, the bones of it, or this,
No, usually I have, with most jokes, I've written it out, like, completely, like, word for word in my notebook. And I'll write it again, which will be, like, more bullet points, and then I'll get up and I'll riff within those bullet points. But I like to write out an entire joke word for word, because that helps me find, as we talked earlier about, like, the sonic quality of jokes. There are words in certain jokes that I absolutely love and will never cut from a joke, because the word is funny to me. And the word joke. So that, to me, is, I find that in my notebooks when I write the joke out word for word. And then, like I said, when you'll see me up there, like, at open mics, not at shows, I'll have my notebook out. Usually the pages turn to bullet points. So I can just kind of at it and remember. I have awful memory. Not only do I have an ADHD, I had 13 concussions in my life. So my brain no work too good. So when I commit things to memory, I can do it, but I don't really commit frivolous things to memory. So I have to keep the space for the jokes that work. So when I'm up at open mics, and it's like the gym, so I don't really mind so much what other comics understand. But I'm looking at, like, a bullet point of a joke, and then I'll try to riff on top of that and find a moment. But that's not I am not a riff comic. I am not the kind of comic that, I will find stuff, but I don't go up there without a safety net. The way I look at jokes, like the metaphor I use is, like, a joke is like being like a monkey in the jungle, and you're swinging from branch to branch. And the most satisfying swings are the branches that are far apart, because you're going to be flying for a minute. But you need to catch that other branch or you're going to fall. And if you're just doing branches that are one hand apart, no one's going to that's like climbing. No one's going to be impressed by that. People are impressed watching monkeys swing.
Yeah.
And so I look at jokes and punchlines, and when I'm telling like a larger story, as swinging from branch to branch. And so I will try at mics to riff and find that branch while I'm in midair. But at a show, no. That goes back to I look at these comics with such envy. The comics that can do that, I can't. I want to make sure that branch is there because these people paid to be here, or they time out of their night to be here. I want to give them the best show that I can, and I don't like leaving it up to chance. I'm not the kind of comic that goes, well, they didn't have fun, but hey, whatever, I want to make sure that is always have fun. To me, that means I want to make sure that I put the work in. And coming from a writer's perspective, you just got to write it out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's move on then to your editing, because when I look at how you edit, you must have a very successful editing process, because when I look at that coexist rifle joke, it started out with, I just want to talk about the fact that my parents couldn't be more different. So you would think that there'd be a lot of wordiness going in there to kind of get the joke on the board with the audience, but you make it very simple with, like, my dad's conservative, my mom's liberal, and they were divorced. Like, and that your set is extremely short. Was that how that joke started, or what do you normally do to edit something down? Because a setup, that's what I would consider a perfect setup. It gives me all the information I need to know in the shortest amount of time to make the punchline as funny as possible.
I totally agree with you. I'm of the same mind. The best jokes are the shortest jokes. My favorite joke in the world is a Mitch Hedberg joke, which is, I don't have a girlfriend. I just have a girl that'd be really mad if she heard me say that. Perfect joke. It's 2 lines, and it explains everything you need to know about that situation.
Yeah.
Hilarious. The shorter you can get to the thing you need to say, the better. And that's the writer in me, totally. I want it sharp. I want it tight. That said, the coexist rifle, that was a divine inspiration. That came out sharp.
So tell me your editing process then. Like, tell me how you would edit
every once in a while, I'll get a joke like that comes out and it's ready and it's short and it's tight. Usually, no, the opposite. Usually I err on the side of wordiness, and then I edit down at open mics. So I endlessly riff things. In fact, I have so much fun adding written tags that I have to I have to decide. I have to kill my babies and choose. I've written 7 tags on this joke. I'm going to get 3 at most. And I've actually tried to write a game with some of these where I decided to try and earn the ability to do multiple tags, where I rattle off a bunch of tags. I have 3 jokes that do this. And then I go, I can do this all night. Let's stop at the one punchline. But sometimes I just throw out every single tag I've ever written, and I just go, hey, this is the runner. I'm going to endlessly tag my jokes out. But usually I write a lot, and then I kill my babies. I cut them down, and I try to get to the bare bones of it to get to the thing I want to say as fast as I can say it. And that was hard for me when I was a younger comic, because that cuts a lot of time. That you fill out a lot of time talking. But now I'm to the point now where I can... Like I said, it's about those branches. So I generally have a good sense of my maximum swing as a comedy ape, you know, and I know how to swing as far as I can without missing that next branch. And so I try to write just enough to get what I need across. Now, I attempt a lot of heady premises that require setup and discussion and talking. So sometimes I can't be as tight as, say, the coexist joke. But if I can, I try to... The poet in me, the writer in me, wants to get that down as tight as possible.
Okay. So, I mean, would your approach then to a setup be, are you saying, is simpler the better? Meaning... With that coexist rifle joke, you could have had a clever way of saying how your dad was conservative and how your mom was liberal, and a really funny, way of how they got divorced. But you were just hey, they just need to know that he's Republican, she's liberal, and they're divorced. Is that how you would approach a setup? Is that how you kind of approach simpler to better, just state bullet point facts and then get to the punchline?
If your punchline's good enough, yes.
Okay.
I think that Sometimes people waste time trying to make a setup funny when the audience doesn't care. That's a thing that comics care about a lot more than audiences.
Okay.
Audiences want a good punchline. They want to laugh. They want it to be rich. What you're saying is to be rich. But they don't need a setup to be funny. A setup can just be a setup. That's a big piece of advice. You talk about like some of these younger guys. I try to tell them like sometimes a setup is just facts. Sometimes a setup is literally, that's why they call it a setup. You are setting up the funny thing. And as long as you can keep that clear and tight, people will ride with you for something that isn't funny.
Okay.
You can get a setup or two that isn't funny as long as the payoff is funny.
Yeah.
So with that, the coexist rifle is such a great image, such a funny way to frame it that it pays, and it pays off in the larger context of like the 10-minute joke that follows, that I set that up just as setup.
Okay.
I don't need to, because then also a lot of what I'm talking about after that is my conservative father or my liberal hippie mother. Those are the larger premises of that like 10 minutes about my family. So that's a quick way to tell you, again, setting the table. Now I don't need to really go back and tell you that, I can just touch on it. Like, then I say, like my mom was such a hippie. She used to burn these aromatic herbs in every room of the house. What does she call them? Newports.
Yeah.
And that's another undermining, because smoking cigarettes isn't really a hippie thing.
Yeah.
But it's fun because you think I'm talking about white sage or whatever. Yeah. So, yeah, that's an undermining of the situation I just set up. But, again, it's all about that push and pull. So, yeah, getting that set up clear and tight up top not only tells you about me, it sets up a number of jokes that now I don't need to reestablish that because I was so clear up top.
Okay. Now, how do you know when a joke's done? Because you're saying you're constantly, constantly trying to riff, and you're constantly editing to make sure everything's as tight and as, as clear as possible. So how do you know when a joke is done?
There are a few jokes of mine that I feel like I've gotten honed down to the point where it's like if I add, I'm actually subtracting.
Okay.
Aim joke, which I know you have on that clip, I feel like I can't. I've tried to make that joke bigger. Dan Deprecation sounds like a guy with a strong opinion on the European economy, but I look like a guy with a strong opinion on Bigfoot. Yeah. I tried to add riffs to that. It was subtracting from the joke. Okay. That joke I knew was done because I couldn't make it better with addition. But generally, that's the only time I'll consider a joke done. I don't think jokes are ever done. I think you can endlessly improve on jokes. I think you can always make your jokes better, except in a situation where it's like that, where you've done it that joke probably at this point hundreds of times, and it's like you just know I can't add anything to this because I have it. But otherwise, yeah, I think there's a lot of jokes where I say a lot of jokes are 99% done because I always want to leave room for the fact that it's better. Okay.
So does that mean that you'll never release your jokes to the public, or you'll be like a Stephen King and release it, and then 10 years from now, like, I rewrote some of these jokes and here they are now, kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm in a weird spot where I'm not. My art has far outpaced my career. So I think a lot of comics are there, but I'm not really looking at recording an album. I'm not in line to do any late night spots or anything where I would cross one of those metrics where comics would say you've burned material, where like you shouldn't go back and tell it. But I am of the mind of like maybe not Jay Leno-esque, but I'm of the mind where like if you have a great joke, you've never really burned it. Like, people won't mind hearing a joke that's I wouldn't mind hearing a joke that was on an old album. Like, if I were to see, like, John Mulaney or something, and he wanted to tell his, like, middle schoolers can make fun of you accurately, and they're like, this high-waisted man's got feminine hips. I would laugh at that joke, even though I can do that joke, from memory. So I like comedy in that way, so I don't believe that you can necessarily burn material, but then again, I've never been in much of a situation where I've had to. Okay. So, maybe if I think the only time I would burn material would be if I were to get a recorded special. Okay. That's not anywhere in the near time horizon for me. So that would be the only time I think I would feel pressure. Even if I put it on an album, I don't think enough people consume comedy albums that it would be bad for you doing it live. Okay. And then, did a great joke like Shane Torres. everyone knows him for his Guy Fieri bit. It's one of the best jokes I've heard in the past 10 years. And he has people scream out, do the Guy Fieri joke. So he actually has like what bands do, where people are calling out his hits. So, you know, you write a great joke, not only do you not want to burn it, you can't burn it. Like, Shane gets asked to do Guy Fieri all the fucking time. So, you know, I think ideally I'd like to get that with all my jokes where people are like, tell it again. Chappelle could get up there and do his baby selling drugs on the corner joke. No one would give a shit that it's one of my favorite jokes. They would be delighted to hear him tell that joke. So I think if you could get to a level of greatness with a joke or with an act, I don't think you necessarily have to burn material. So, but for me, I mean, I'm lucky in the fact that, lucky in the way that I haven't been successful enough to burn material.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Dan. So we'll wrap up with, I didn't forget about the question, I just pinned it for later, which was who is Dan Deprecation? And I'm going to try to answer it for you, and let me see if you agree, and you can see that way you know I was paying attention the whole time. So if I caught any theme from this conversation or anything that I hear come up more than 2 times, it was that you care about a lot of people, and the fact that really the only agreement you had with your father was that he didn't really have much empathy towards others, and you disagreed. You may not agree with his politics, but you really didn't like the fact that he didn't have empathy. So whatever it is, your soul, or if you don't believe in soul, like your DNA, is that Dan Deprecation is an inherently caring person, and you grew up in a life where you saw your mother and father not care about each other. You saw your schoolmates not care about you, or not a lot of caring going on. And the people in your life who did show care, like your mother who cared for you when you were growing up, and your aunt to some extent, and Bill Dixon in the comedy world, you have now kind of assumed that identity. You assume kind of liberal politics of those individuals, kind of like the nature of like the almost like a mothering nature. Even Alejandro can be lightly touched on, somebody who but you go and you try to push people that you see have talent, and you try to not let them give up if they had a rough set. You mentioned that with Jay Yoder. So I would say Dan Deprecation is just a caring person who just has a very progressive mindset and just wants to see everybody treated fairly and happy, because he wasn't always afforded those things growing up. Would that be true?
That's a beautiful way to put it. I probably would not have summarized it that way, but that was true, I find. Yeah, I want everyone to get along. I mean, I got into comedy to make people happy. I want people to be happy. Let's be happy. There's so much that in this world, there's so much of the society in this world exists to make you sad, to grind you down. And I think one of the best parts about comedy is it can lift every single person up. And that's kind of what I want to do and sometimes I lift people up by putting myself down, but I'm always trying to lift people up and trying to elevate a situation and just, you know, good vibes, make people laugh and smile, because more of that in the world, it snowballs. It has a rolling effect. And I think when you spread positivity, not only do you get it in return, but it gets paid forward. So, yeah. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for...
Oh, no problem. Anytime, man. Anytime. And I would encourage any viewer who lives locally to the coastal area to check you out monthly at Animated Brewing Company, and check out your Instagram and Twitter, which I'll put in the show notes here as well.
Awesome. Okay, great.
All right, buddy.
I love this podcast. I usually listen to like one episode. I'm listening to multiple, and I'm going to continue. You by booking me, you've made me a fan of your podcast.
Oh,
so individually, you're going to build a fan base.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But no, I appreciate your candor and your ability to be open and giving and everything. So thank you for your time, the most precious of your resources.
For your time. Sincerely, you're a great interviewer. These were like next level questions.
Thank you.
I enjoyed answering them. So this was a great conversation.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate it, Dan. And I hope.
Hopefully I'll see you soon.